Well, good evening. I've been watching everything that's happening in the world. I mean, the parts of the world that I can see from my little portal, the same as everybody has with the internet and everything. And a number of things have seemed to be most relevant to seeing through the eyes of Tiendo, I hope, I believe, through what they taught and left as a record and that I experienced. So let me start with, this kind of be a general video. I wish I was more organized and as some of the producers in YouTube are, but it's not my way, I guess. But I heard a story on Radiolab that was about metamorphosis. And I had been asking some time ago, not that long ago, but even fairly recently, to understand more about metamorphosis in the human. Because I remember talking about it to people, and because I talked to, probably at least a half dozen or more people every day through the various websites and social media that I'm a part of. And so I end up comparing the metamorphosis of a human with the metamorphosis of a caterpillar that Tiendo taught in 1975. Their organization was named at that point Human Individual Metamorphosis. It wasn't really an organization. They didn't establish it in any way that I ever heard about or saw evidence of, like as a DBA or anything. It's just what they and the acronyms were HIM, which I think was a reference to Jesus. So metamorphosis, just to recap what Tiendo taught in statement 1, I guess I should have that up and ready to read, but talks about how the process, the overcoming process, is a christening process, a Christing process, and that is basically separating from the human kingdom, and even dying to the human kingdom, and dying to our literally and figuratively dying by separating from the behaviors and ways and the and giving service to the human kingdom, through the governments or the religions or the corporations or whoever we give service to, which I know, it can be said that we all have to give a certain amount of service by buying the stuff that's provided, food, blah, blah, blah. But that's not really the service. The service is when we actually believe in what they believe in. And we talk about it to others, as if, okay, vote for this person, that's giving service to that structure. But regardless of which party it is, it's giving service to the structure when you're actually speaking about the things that you believe in. and the people you believe in that are considered to be your authorities. That's another thing. Science, for many people, it's a term that's being used a lot. Like all these keywords that aren't really relative in a literal interpretation, because science is a process, I believe. It's not a person, place, or thing, but yet it's treated as a person, place, or thing. I believe in science, people say. Okay, well, what are they saying? They say, I believe in the scientific method. Well, fine, but what is the scientific method? Is according to the user what the scientific method is. Observing, or it's the observation of the user. And Jesus wasn't a scientist. He was proposing the scientific method by telling us to observe the signs in the heavens, the signs of the times, the signs that he was describing throughout Matthew, Mark, and Luke Gospels, and John's Gospel too. There are many signs in those words. In fact, I guess you could say that pretty much everything he said ended up being a type of sign of the return. In other words, if somebody was saying anything that was different from what he taught, then they were less apt to be evidencing being the sign of his return. Well, let me get back to Metamorphosis, and I'll go back to the signs after that. But so I'm just going to read this. Here's a great story from Radiolab that is about metamorphosis and how science has shown some perspectives, even going back to thousands of years, of what happens that turns a caterpillar into a butterfly. This is the analogy T and Doe used when they first came public in 1975, naming their effort Human Individual Metamorphosis, saying that by putting all our energy into a single-minded focus, they were providing, or the focus they were providing, we were actually changing our body from the inside out, growing a new body in the process. And T and Doe talked about that as body changes, was their words for it. That we were starting body changes by following their directions and their instructions and their teachings. We were starting the body changes. And okay, so T and Doe later compared it to what Jesus had completed at what became called the Transfiguration Mount. And that word transfigure in Matthew 17:2 came from the Greek word metamorpho. Metamorpho. It was at that meeting that where three of Jesus' disciples, which was Peter, John, and James. And James was, I believe, the one that was called James the Just. And at one point, Jesus seemed to indicate that if he wasn't around, look to James. And James is the one that, in the few letters that he wrote, talked about how works, in other words, actions, faith without works was dead faith. In other words, you needed to work for your faith, to prove your faith, and to develop your faith. You had to actually do things. You had to have experiences. Tiendo always talked about that the classroom was an experiential classroom. In other words, it wasn't based on sitting at a desk and studying words, even though we had things that Tiendo wrote, and we had all the audio tapes that they gave us, that we were compelled, not compelled, we were instructed to study. But it wasn't very often that Tiendo said that we should re-listen to a tape as an instruction. They left it up to us on how fast we wanted to grow to re-listen to the tapes. They encouraged it, and a few times they actually instructed us to listen to a tape of a meeting that they had just given. Listen to it again as a group. But they were always available to listen to as individuals anytime we wanted to. We had a number of recorders, tape players, that we could stick the tape into and start to listen to it. And we protected the tapes by, flipping the little switch on them so that they wouldn't be overwritten. And we copied them, so we'd have another copy, so more people could listen to the same meeting at the same time, if that was what people wanted. But it wasn't that often that many people listened to the tapes over and over again that I saw. But that wasn't the fault of anybody, because we had a lot of tasks. And being of service meant performing our tasks to the best of our ability and getting more tasks, because we were thriving on having jobs to do. Work, that's how you build your faith. That's how you demonstrate faith, is by working for the next level. That's why Tiendo said that the overall formula that there's degrees of application of, they didn't say it in those words, but they said it by having 3 types of individuals that would be that would go with him, go with Tiendo. Be removed from the planet or from the surface when the recycling takes place, or from being removed from having our spirits recycled or souls recycled in the lake of fire, which that doesn't happen completely until after the vehicles that need to be recycled are recycled, and it appears to be like 1,000 years after the vehicles are all recycled that or the spading takes place. In other words, the root systems of the tares are dug up. The tares are those humans that were seeded by the Luciferian space alien fallen angels. That people are saying are the Nephilim, the giants that were sown by the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 and the book of Enoch talks about. The individuals that were humans subject to the Luciferian hybridization program that at that point might have been strictly sexual intercourse driven by a reverse metamorphosis that the Luciferians went through with the current physical body that they have. That lived longer than human physical bodies. But when they went into reverse metamorphosis, I think they lost some of their longevity at the same time, I suspect. I don't know that for a fact. But eventually they died off, but they had accumulated vehicles that they cultivated for them to occupy. And those are what are seen in the spacecrafts that are the alien spacecrafts, not the next level spacecrafts, because the next level, they could certainly take a human onto their spacecraft if they wanted to. I think Tino indicated that at times they may have a reason to do that, but that's not. But they're not the ones that are doing the abductions. If those abductions are still happening, which I don't know if they are still happening, but there are some indications that they are, and I have no reason to think that they would be stopped. Because I think the hybridization program is continuous. Because they're trying to design a vehicle that's going to be more and more apt to travel in space, or to live underground for extended periods of time, and to have certain strengths or abilities or talents or skills or that can be useful to those Luciferian space alien fallen angel souls, to use as their pawns, as their slaves. Even though they don't think of themselves as slaves and pawns, they are enslaved the same way that many humans are enslaved to their government, and enslaved to their religion, and enslaved to their corporations, and enslaved to their universities, and enslaved to their, it's not all the same kind of enslavement, but it depends on what they outgrow, what they see through and move away from, what they separate from. Otherwise, it's all enslavement, because if they don't eventually move past giving their loyalties to those human organizations and people, then they may never recognize the reality of the beings that actually created everything and designed it for a reason, instead of thinking that it all just happenstance happened, or that the space aliens were all the generators of everything, which is a bastardization of the truth. It's a facsimile, Doe would call it. And I don't think Doe ever used the word bastardization, so I should eliminate that from my vocabulary, because he gave better words, which were like facsimile, or what was the other word he used? It escapes me at the moment, but it was the the things that the Luciferians always did right after the older members left, and that's happening right now, big time. Of course, just like it happened after Jesus left and after Moses left, and probably after Enoch left, and after Elijah left. I imagine after every time an older member left, you can be guaranteed that the souls, at least, of the Luciferian space aliens were busy trying to sabotage the truth by using half-truths or quarter-truths or some fraction of the truth mixed in with a whole bunch of lies, so that you can't recognize what the difference is for those people that aren't given the gift of that recognition. And that gift of recognition comes in the soul deposit, but needs to be nurtured in order for it to grow, to be able to compete against the flood of misinformation that is also allowed to exist on the garden. That becomes the fertilizer to stimulate the growth. Because, like, I tell you, I get sometimes very frustrated talking about is called human-caused global warming. And now they're talking about, well, let's not get back into that. Let me go back into the metamorphosis. Because in this story, or in the science of the metamorphosis, what they did was, and I'm not going to read it anymore because I can just summarize it, but some scientists fairly recently cut open the chrysalis, the cocoon where the chrysalis was taking place. And it's interesting that chrysalis and Christ has the same sounding. But so they cut it open, and what did they see? They didn't see a caterpillar anymore. There was no legs, there were no antennas, there was no head of the caterpillar or a long body like the caterpillar. What they saw was goo. They were calling it goo. Just a mass of goo. And so it's like the old had dissolved into another form. Energy had changed into a different form of matter. And yet, I don't know if I can remember this precisely the way, when I post this, I'm going to post a link to the Radiolab MP3 podcast that talks about this, because it's very interesting. And it goes back to science that was performed even thousands of years ago that actually revealed some things too. But anyway, so they ended up doing some experiments, and more than one time they did these experiments where they subjected caterpillars to a certain to certain chemicals, and they trained the caterpillars that when a certain chemical was put in their environment, they would not eat the food or something like that, or they would go away from it. Now, I'm not going to go through, I can't really talk about the details of that experiment, but you can listen to the Radiolab show. You can search for it on Metamorphosis. But like I said, I'll put the link on my YouTube video. Anyway, in the subject, in the description of the video. And and then they bred from those caterpillars new baby caterpillars, okay, and then they separated them and subjected them to the same programming using this chemical, and the result was the same. The baby caterpillars also steered away from the food or wherever this chemical was on. They didn't want anything to do with it, which showed that something had changed in their genes that recorded that experience and became was altering the genes to where now it was instinctual to stay away from that chemical or anything that chemical was on. So now, this experiment might have actually had to do with caterpillars that became butterflies, and how then the butterflies were staying away from whatever that chemical was put on, showing that the genes survived that that experience as goo inside the chrysalis. In other words, Tiendo talked about the genes in two ways. There was the genetics associated with the flesh through our genetic strains, but that that each of the genes was actually a computer, I think Tiendo said. And Tiendo talked about us as, talked about our computer. And I always thought that they were talking about the brain until one day they said, the brain's not your computer. But they didn't really go into it anymore, except to say that it's on one of the audio tapes, and I should have refreshed I didn't know I was going to get into this much. But I always think of new things to say when I start these videos, especially when I hear myself saying things that aren't thorough or aren't accurate, or then I want to pull in more understanding from Tiendo's minds on the spot, if I can, from the things that they said in the past that I heard and remembered. So I'm not always that thorough about making these little videos, obviously. I know people know that from watching them. But then basically it enables us to each go in to look at the record and search on the record, for the index of the audio files, to listen to what Tiendo taught about genetics, genes, and metamorphosis, and like I just was talking about. But when Tiendo said that when we became members of the next level, they didn't think that we would remember our human experiences. Maybe not right away, or maybe perhaps any more than Doe remembered his Jesus experiences until late, near before he left. According to Rio's report in his book, Doe remembered something about when he was incarnate in the vehicle named Jesus. That had to do with why he came back to Jerusalem when he did, knowing that he would be bumped off when he came back. Is because he knew that he needed to lay down his life to demonstrate the Christing process of converting his body, of showing, demonstrating the conversion of his body from a human body to a next level body that was growing inside of his human body. Literally, not figuratively, literally growing inside his human body. And so that body, which started as the soul deposit, but also has a physicality to it, could demonstrate characteristics that were above human, like levitating, if there was a need to, like he did over the water. I talked about this in the last broadcast, I remember, but so let me get past this now. But that was the butterfly body. Now, it was all right. Well, I guess that's enough said on the metamorphosis. But that, like Jesus said, that you can't save your life in this world and then become and have a life in the next level. So it's all a matter of degrees of how we are separating from our life in this world that draws in the mind from Tiendo when we use their instructions and directions and example and behaviors and ways as our new criteria for life, for our lives. And I have to mention that there's been somebody that's been talking to me on my email about wanting to start another classroom. And I explained extensively to this person that that would be a dilution and a distortion and the opposite of what Tiendo instructed for us, believers in them now, to do. Yes, it's lonely being a believer in Tiendo because there aren't a group of people around that we can sit around with and talk to the choir, to get approval from, okay? And so we're kind of like always subject to people that doubt and stimulate our own doubts, which is fine because that's how we build our mind, by dealing with those doubts and trying to understand the things that we doubt, why we doubt those things, that Tiendo said and did. It's through trying to understand those things and seeking their mind in the process by talking to them, asking them for help to understand those things, that we grow our mind and also grow our capacity to have more of their mind in us, to start our metamorphosis. Now, I don't know if we're actually changing our current bodies now or not. But it doesn't matter. Because we aren't changing our souls. And those souls will be saved if we continue the course until we die and don't go against Tiendo or give our loyalty back to the human kingdom. Ultimately, then those souls will be saved and will have future opportunities and future service to the next level, and we will then be in a vehicle at some point to where we're in a classroom and we're changing that vehicle into a next level vehicle. that can then be the pilot of a dense physical vehicle that's grown for the next level soul vehicle to occupy. But there were some monks I think in the early Hindu background that were talking about this metamorphosis. So it's been provided. This information has been provided before, and I don't know if that's where Tiendo picked up on it by reading about it, from that Hindu part, but. It doesn't matter if Tiendo were the first ones to talk about that in our history books. The fact is that when they found that, they recognized the truth in it, if that's the way it came to their physical vehicles. Because the physical vehicles need to be primed in order to receive things. I'm not saying all things. But maybe most things, the vehicles have to be prepared to have this understanding. And that's why Tiendo thought that Jesus' vehicle was prepared by the next level, by not having it being born of fornication. In other words, sexuality, born of intercourse. Because to the next level, all intercourse is fornication, because it's, even though that word's been used now and it's, just associated with watching people have sex on all kinds of sex, and that's called porn, which comes from fornication. Anyway, but and Californication, right, is that joke, but I don't think that's necessarily an accident, because it's the area that was set up to be the primary vicinity where humans were going to be raised to give their love to a false god, to false gods, to false spirituality, to the cosmic consciousness, the so-called Christ consciousness, using all the same terms, but applying it to a etheric, nebulous, universal mind that has no people in it. And Tiendo used that word people to describe members of the next level. And when they used that term, because of my spiritual indoctrination that I have from the birth of this vehicle, I'm sure, and a little bit from the upbringing, although I wasn't really raised with much of that, like some people were, because my vehicle's parents were Catholics, but they didn't go to church only on Sundays, and other than that, I think they tried to follow some of the laws of the Catholic Church, but not entirely, because my dad, I learned when I was a teenager, had condoms in his drawer, and I think those weren't permitted by the Catholic Church, so he wasn't abiding by the church's rules 100%. They did eat fish on Fridays, so, but that didn't really develop a spiritual basis to their children, to this vehicle. So I got it from something else. Recognizing that there was truth to that, but not identifying with the way it was being expressed to me through the religions. entirely. Anyway, so I don't think I covered this as well as I wanted to, but that was the most interesting thing. So, but listen to that Radio Lab broadcast. I would suggest to get the full breadth of what was reported, that I think has a lot of truth to it. That shows that these human bodies are actually essentially dissolving. Because the first thing that we did when we went into our cocoons in the chrysalis condition, starting the chrysalis condition, by being removed from the world, our physical bodies were removed from the world, we had to cut off our ties, we had to stop thinking about the past. So that meant not thinking about our parents or our spouses or our brothers and sisters or our friends or the things that we used to do, playing music or whatever we used to do in the world, our favorite foods, all the things that we desired. Any of those thoughts need to be aborted. So that was disconnecting from our past. That was the dissolving of our human life, in the figurative sense of life at that point. But actually in the literal sense, that it was a description of what our life had become at that point. All the things that we do does describe our life. Everything we think and do. So if you eliminate all the things we think and do, then that life is being dissolved into a goo. Okay? But what the scientists said in that broadcast was that the only way they could see that, that's right, that information about the caterpillars made its way into the butterflies, made its way through the goo experience, was because somewhere in that goo there was a brain. And that's what Tiendo said, actually. They said that every cell has a brain. And so that's why you can even override disease by accessing that brain of every cell and bringing healing into that brain. Now, that's also done by, like Jesus said, the way he did his healing was with prayer and fasting. So prayer is by asking the next level to help us. That's accessing next level mind that we recognize exists on how to solve our problems. Whether the problem is how to not, be overcome by a disease of some sort. And which also entails, like Jesus said, sometimes fasting. So sometimes you can't just use belief alone. Like, prayer alone isn't enough to heal the vehicle 100% in all ways. Fasting is necessary, and fasting doesn't necessarily mean no food. Okay, no fuel. It could, but fasting, like for instance, for the Transfiguration diet, meant getting rid of all mucus-forming foods. So basically having nothing cooked on except for slow-heated things that actually don't kill the enzymes in the foods that we eat, and don't disfigure the minerals into other forms that the body can't identify or use. and if that can happen to minerals. I'm not sure exactly how that happens with the minerals, but or the proteins, whatever. But so that's the fast I went on. I didn't do it 100% according to the Transfiguration diet, because I also know about things that Tiendo instigated after the Transfiguration diet that were also geared towards promotion of health in our vehicles and clarity in our thinking, in our minds, to have less problems with our even our testosterone levels. Tiendo even tried to, do things to reduce our the influence of sensuality on our vehicles by the things we would eat or not eat. And which I can't remember exactly the examples of them, but if I think about them, I'll put them in a comment, or I'll talk about it in the next video. But let's see, this is where faith healing can actually be true. Where what you're doing actually is getting rid of the influences. And when you get rid of the influences, you're getting rid of their programming of their diseases that they had accumulated in their life, whether it was a mental disease or a physical disease. I mean, they could be somebody that hates people that are of different nationality than they, or different skin color than they, or a different gender orientation than they, or a different sexual orientation than they, and those would all be diseases, to hate those things. The only things to hate are the things that influence us away from giving ourselves to the next level and growing towards next level membership. Those are the only things to hate in the world. But those other things aren't to be hated, because that's just judgmentalism, which Jesus talked against and Tiendo talked against, of the vehicle. The shape and the size and the color and the ways of the vehicle, whether it's intelligent or not, or whether it's handicapped or not, and all these bigotries that the humans are programmed with. But that programming serves the opportunity to override the programming. So in other words, that was also part of the chrysalis in that cocoon stage, was that whenever negativity came up in our heads, to get rid of it, convert it to a positive. How do you convert it to a positive? Say, by ignoring you and by cutting your thoughts off, I'm building my mind, because I'm following my next level procedure and instructions on how to get rid of that influence, those thoughts. Wow, a moth just flew in front of my face. So, I wonder if that moth's a caterpillar. But, was a caterpillar. He's attracted to me, right? Because I'm talking about caterpillars. I'm only joking. I hope that's not the case. Because I don't want my vibration to be that on the level of a moth. Anyway, now I hear the thought, but how do you know that there's not an advanced being inside that moth? Well, you know what? All indications from Tiendo are that it's not. There's no advanced being inside that moth. That's a distortion of the truth. Anyway, so All right, so they were thinking that there was a brain in the genes of that goo, of that caterpillar that changed to goo. And so that's why they remembered their aversion to the chemical. You know, for a long time, people, when they first started to, examine genes, they thought that it was hereditary and what you were born with remained that way. They couldn't be changed. But that's evidence right there that genes can be can change. In other words, and Tiendo taught this, that we can impress upon our genes a new pattern, a new way of thinking, a new way of behaving and acting, to where that then becomes what is the substance of our new body, becomes the brain of our new body, or the compilation of all the cells in our body. That, I guess, when that takes place sufficiently, then we would have evolved a new futuristic body within this primitive one. Though in the case of Jesus, he had to return to his Father before they could touch him. Because I'm not sure why. Maybe his body was not maybe the body that came out of the tomb wasn't very physical, so it would have made them think when they didn't feel much that Jesus was a spirit, and that would have gone against what he was trying to teach them, that the kingdom of God was a physical kingdom, and he had a physical body that he demonstrated could still eat, and he said, "I am not a spirit." I have to remind a Christian that said that God is a spirit of that scripture, where he said, "I am not a spirit, I'm flesh and bone." Even though it might not have been flesh like the human flesh and bone. It might not have been bone like the human bone. Maybe he didn't say flesh and bone, maybe he said flesh and blood. I get mixed up. But I'll have to go back and look at that so that I clarify it in my head. But, all right, I'm going to jump off of that subject and move into some different things that I saw happening or saw articles about. And one of them was FRBs. Apparently on August 26th, 2017, there were 15 bursts from the same direction in a distant galaxy, 3 billion light years away. From that same direction, as I understand it, came 16 bursts detected on February 15th, 2015. Now, 2015, it seems like the 5 and the 6 and the 7. Well, you know what? The 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7, the 8, the 9. Or the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyway, within a 7-year period, there seems to always be demonstration of progress in a certain manifestation of prophecy. Okay? So that in, I guess, 2010, I'm thinking now, well, 2013 is actually, I don't know. It's very hard to line up the dates, and I think that's for a reason. Because when we get too involved in lining up all the dates, sometimes we start to get too confident, and then we start to forecast things, and it's we're better off not trying to forecast exact dates for things. I mean, general dates it shouldn't really be forecasted unless we're interpreting the forecast given to us by the next level, like in the Revelation. Like talking about the two witnesses. That was the forecast that was given. So to talk about, their 42 months, trying to understand what that meant, the word month meant, and it also means affirmation periods for individuals, is important if you're going to try to see what full truth is revealed in those prophecies, in those generalization, figurative, symbolic information provisions. So, which is what I've spent a lot of time on. I'm criticized for doing it, of course, by a number of people. And, but they can't really say why. It's not appropriate for me to do it. But if the next level, they always change things up a little bit, it seems like, so that we can't count on understanding the signs 100%. We can't anticipate the signs 100%. Like I was trying to imagine, well, I'm not going to talk about that yet. So anyway, but these fast radio bursts were detected in 2015, February 15th. That's when, within a day or two or three, that's when Tiendo left Bernie, Texas, with the understanding and the knowledge and the awakening that they were from outer space, both, and were here to bring updates to the Bible and to fulfill prophecy. Now there again, they were here to fulfill prophecy. So what's wrong with trying to describe how they fulfill all the prophecy? When they said they were here to fulfill prophecy, were they here only to fulfill Revelation chapter 11, two witnesses prophecy? No. They were here to fulfill all prophecy, because all prophecy was talked about also by Jesus in certain general terms, and less in symbolic terms. When Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 22 and 23, talking about how he was going to manifest to the world, to his disciples, but not to the world, by his Father and him both residing with us. That was basically telling us that he would be among us as the two witnesses, because that's the only place in those prophecies where it talks about two coming, and also Daniel talked about two coming, and also Zechariah talked about two coming. So we got all these different proofs, and there's other ones as well that said that two were coming and that they would be speaking, because prophecy means that you're speaking. And you can't reside with people and speak unless you have a vehicle that can be understood by those people that you're coming to. So thus, they spoke in the language, they were raised in the culture, or the lack of culture, however you want to see it, of the United States, in Texas. And so that February 15th fast radio burst, remember, radio signals was the way Tiendo said that the next level communicated with them, using radio signals. So for there to be radio signals communicating with all these huge dishes that are trained on different places in outer space and have been for years, for many years, for decades, in some cases, even in the plains of San Augustine, near the Roswell crash, where it happened, they were getting, kind of consistent measurements the whole time from their radio signals that they were getting from different places in outer space, okay? And if you looked at a graph that looks like an electrocardiogram, just a little vibration of the frequencies, like an oscilloscope, then all of a sudden you would see a big spike that was like, many times, like if the little frequencies were an inch high, this was now a foot high, that spiked when they got these bursts. And and 2015 was the year where the Ceres lights were identified, which was speaking to the way green was used in the Revelation's fourth seal opening as descriptive of the vehicle that was talked about as a horse that would rise to power in the beast, the secret government, or that the United States represents at this point. There may not, among the people in government, there might not be much secret to the secret government anymore. But I'm sure there's plenty of secrets still, but they're all in bed with the same thing. Regardless of what they know, whether they're a general that knows more than an admiral knows, and more than a president knows, and more than a scientist knows, and blah blah blah. In each of their departments, they know stuff that's happening that isn't public information exactly, or things that have happened in the past that were not stated as facts in the public. They might be part of the conspiracies, of course, but those they can get around by just saying, oh, that's a conspiracy, so we can't really put any legitimacy onto it. But these fast radio bursts, well, I don't know how that relates. But it's also interesting that also as it was February 15, 2015, when the first 16 burst spike was detected at parks in Australia, I had to take notice of the date 42 years after Tian-Do first awakened to being from outer space. Like I said, bring updates to the Bible and to fulfill prophecy. It was 42 years after that. It was also actually 2015 was also the year, almost simultaneous to the day almost, that the Ceres lights were being reported as looking like a city like Las Vegas from outer space, looks from the Earth satellites. The New Horizons spacecraft was going by Pluto and showing those 4 big openings in the southerly part of Pluto, which I've talked about before. So that was happening at the same time, and Pluto was also talked about in that same Revelations chapter 6, verse 8, I think it was, where it talked about hell followed. And hell comes from the word, the Greek word Hades. And the Greek word Hades is also synonymous with Pluto as the god of death. In other words, the god of the harvest, because the harvest entails death. Death to the stalks and harvesting of the fruit. The stalks are the human vehicles. So, since So what did I say that happened again on? That, August 26th. Well, okay, it was August 21st when, right, when the Great American Eclipse happened. Okay? So, these 15 bursts happened 5 days later. But 4 days later is when Harvey hit shore. So it's like the next level right now is like machine gun firing the signs. At least during this time. It may slow down again after September. Or maybe not. Maybe it won't slow down. Maybe it'll just keep on happening. Because now we've got Irma, which is shaping up to be even a bigger hurricane that looks like it's going to hit Florida. And, when I started to think, when I saw Harvey, the devastation of Harvey, I thought, well, I wonder what the next place would be that in the United States that would have some kind of a calamity. Because, the waves roaring was part of the Jesus forecast for this time, where he said, I'm going to skip over to that. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity. The sea, and didn't say perplexity and, it says with perplexity, distress of nations, in place, time, or state, perplexity. Perplexity meaning a state of quandary. That's like confusion, isn't it? Wondering, not understanding, being Let me see what else it says here. Be at a loss mentally. Stand in. Be in doubt. Be perplexed. Oh yeah, it's a big time of doubt. There's people that are, there's Christian ministers who had been in the ministry for many years in the Houston area that left the ministry because of Harvey, the devastation that was done to Harvey, and thinking, how could God allow this to happen? I read at least one article about it, and I would think if there's one, there's more than one. Because they no longer have a perspective of what God is and what this planet is. It's a hothouse. It's a garden. The garden has weeds in it. The weeds need to be pulled up. Those that have a potential to being fruit are sealed. That's what the first seal was, the second seal, the third seal, and now we're in the fourth seal. So the seals are taking place simultaneously with the provision of the understanding of the prophecy and the application and the implementation of that prophecy, the manifestation of that prophecy in reality. In reality in the physical realm, through waves roaring. So no, the earth isn't going to be destroyed by water, but there's another way of looking at that, because that's what it said right after the flood in the Noah records. The Lord apparently said that Moses recorded that the Lord wouldn't destroy the earth by water again. Okay, but so how was the earth supposed to be recycled this time? And it's by fire. But you know what? It's really interesting that there's more and more science now that shows that the sun's gamma radiation is increasing with solar flares. The solar wind provides the gamma radiation, and that gamma radiation heats both the air and the water, and is thought to extend to the core of the earth, heating up the magma. But there's also some science now, which I posted this on my Facebook account, Sawyer Heaven's Gate, the stories to this on the BP Earthwatch, even though a bunch of what he believes I think is off track from what it could be. His science research has been a blessing that I think he's received a lot of help from the next level to be as clear as he is, and to go after the subjects that he goes after for the most part, when he talks about examining the comets and examining the hurricanes and whatever else is happening that are the signs of the times, the wars and everything else. But the stress of nations is another one of these things that was in that forecast, and that has to do with anxiety, anguish, and restraint of nations. Okay, but when seeing the restraint of nations can also mean the lack of restraint of nations. Is also a completely legitimate way of looking at the prophecy, talking about how you would see the the stress of nations, the stressed nations. Or I think, anyway, because you're also seeing some restraint of nations too, but that's not as big of a description, I don't think, as anxiety, anguish. And it has to do with the ears, with a crowd or siege. To compress the ears with a crowd or siege. Or arrest a prisoner. Figuratively, to compel, perplex, afflict, preoccupy, constrain, hold, keep in press. Keep in, press, lie sick of, stop nations. In other words, this is what's happening, like with North Korea, with Iran, with Syria, with Yemen, with Libya, with Venezuela, with the bigger nations have been against those nations for decades now. The United States was trying to topple Venezuela for, I think, several decades now. I remember from right after 9/11, I remember there was the coup that took place without a shot fired in Venezuela. And they actually had the footage of what was happening in their state house when the military came in and tried to take control. And they ended up being, apparently they ended up taking control, but I guess, but I have to know more details to actually understand how that happened. But the appearance was that it didn't happen. They didn't actually take control. But there was a lot of American involvement in that coup d'etat through the Organization for American States, I think it was, which is a conservative think tank that I think may have started during the Reagan years when they were, with the Sandinistas, supporting the revolutionaries against the Sandinista government that was leaning towards the Russians. That's what's happened. That the whole Soviet Union and the American thing was like a proxy war in South America, as well as Afghanistan, as well as places in Africa. And so now there's a proxy war. There's more proxy wars happening. So this verse is then it says that men's hearts will be failing them for fear, and for those things that are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. It doesn't say that they're shaken yet, because it talks about that later, that the powers of heaven will be shaken. Now, usually when they use the word shall, it's because of the mode, or maybe it's not mode. I now forgot what you call it, but it's the past, present, or future aspect of whatever nouns and verbs are used. But in this case, the powers, the ability, the abundance, the meaning, the might, could actually refer to the Luciferians. Because remember in Revelation 12, it talked about how they were cast to the earth, the dragon with the 10 horns and the 7 heads and the 10 horns was cast to the earth again. Well, that could be talking about this right here. Jesus could have been talking about that right here as being the powers of heaven, because they are powerful. The Luciferians are powerful. They were given the ability to have power. When George Bush came to power, the next level said in Revelation 12, which I'm going to go to, no, Revelation 6, and there went out another horse that was red, and power was given. I don't know why power is in. But was, there's no word for was here. But it doesn't matter. I mean, you don't have to use the word power, but you can say, and given to him and given to, okay, Revelation 6:4, for those that perhaps are blind or are listening to this from a distance. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Okay, so take peace from the earth in all forms can mean stimulating war, okay? The 9/11 attacks did just that. Stimulated justification for war with the war in Iraq was on their minds even at that time. Because they didn't because some people didn't agree with how far Bush didn't go all the way to Baghdad. The first Bush, Herbert Walker Bush. And that they should kill one another, and there was given to him a great sword. Well, a great sword has to do with sword being a large knife for killing animals, cutting flesh, a sword as distinguished from a large sword, curved sword, a cutting stroke, a straight sword for thrusting. Well, it is all those things, but it's but it's also the military. Okay, because the great sword is what they did battle with. But what takes place, the killing that takes place because of that sword, is what's talked about really going underway in the United States, because when the fourth seal is opened, and it's the pale horse, and which really means green horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Okay, so that means that the cutting down of the stalks is part of the harvest. Death, in other words, is part of the harvest. And it's death of the vehicles. And death of the vehicles actually solidifies the belief of those vehicles. So if you died while you believed in the kingdom of God, then that's what the next level will use to decide where to save your spirit or soul, if you had a soul. And so nothing is lost. Just the vehicle that's lost. Not that that's pleasant for the vehicles that are left behind to experience, and it's not necessarily pleasant for the vehicle while the vehicle's dying, but very often it's very quick that the vehicles die. The next level can actually save some that they want to save. so that they will get some more lessons before they lose their vehicle. So, but the end result is those that aren't in communication with them in some way, aren't separating from their humanness in some way, aren't refusing to receive the mark of the beast in some way. All those that are siding with the beast, receiving the marks, living by their rules, becoming nationalists, and all that entails, trusting in their intelligence, trusting in their methods of killing people and in order to have their security and to make their profits, not ignoring the ramifications to their products that they're putting on the market that are killing people from the inside out through the diseases that they're instilling in people. All those people that are engaged in all that, when they die, they're also sorted to whatever box or bucket, as Tiendo referred to those areas, or that they are put in so that they can be judged for what they were given, what they were provided. If they weren't provided with, if they didn't have much capacity to know the truth or to seek the truth, then there's less of a criteria for determining whether that spirit needs to be recycled or not. Or whether that spirit could be used for some other purpose, for seeding the next planet, to gravitate, to help develop the human strains, those brains and those cells. So, where was I? Let me go back to the fast radio burst. I don't know if there's anything else to say about this. Yeah, I began to wonder because there were 16 bursts in 2015, and then there were 15 bursts just in 2017, 2 years later. So does that mean that there's another 14 bursts of 2 years in between each? So that'd be 28 years? Interesting that that's divisible by 7, as is 42. So 2017 plus 28 years. I said I wasn't going to do this, right? No, I didn't say this. I'm not. It's 2035, which is almost 40 years from when they left. But that might mark the time when the recycling is in full swing. And when the false prophet and when the beast is recycled in the lake of fire. And when talking about them, and talking about the physical beast and false prophet. The individuals that are fulfilling those categories, or those behavioral groups, or however you want to look at it. So, now Tiendo talked about how tornadoes were used in storms. I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to go through this again. So let me skip to my next thing. was looking at a video that talked about how the next hurricane, Irma, there's one behind it called Jose. And it seems to be taking the same path that Irma's taking. But right now it's only at 45 miles per hour in its wind speed, and it's traveling at about 14 miles per hour. And so it's going to be a while before it comes along, and don't know where it's going to go. But it's almost as if the next level is repeating the previous patterns with, well, a number of different hurricanes that happened one in each year, with Katrina and then Irene, which affected the Northeast quite a bit with some major flooding from rain, and the hurricane that devastated a big part of New Jersey coast. So that perhaps Irma is gonna, travel all the way up the East Coast. I don't know, or maybe just part of the coast, and maybe another one will come along and travel up before it's all done for this season. Or maybe there'll be more to come even after that, because there's also another tropical depression in the Gulf right now that's growing. So this is really, I mean, part of the debate on, human-caused global warming indicates that, it's from fossil fuel burning primarily, and aerosols is part of that, and there was something else that was considered to be part of that. I don't know what that was, but if you go to Wikipedia's global warming controversy or debate, you'll see some of the debate, even though it's pretty slanted, against debate against human-caused global warming. They do still provide some of the arguments why they think that humans are causing all of it, which is a kind of extreme way of talking about it. And what's the value to them, to the government being behind the Paris Accord and everything else? The advantage is that they get to allot monies to programs and award them to corporations to help them develop their energy sources and their ability to produce energy through non-fossil fuel means. Okay, so but why do they want to do that? They want to do it to make more money? No, they don't want to do that to make more money. They can make more money sticking with the oil, right? I think so. I think that's pretty apparent. Because these other forms of energy, the sun and the wind, and those are the two primary ways that alternative energy can be developed. Can be done by people in their homes, pretty easily with just a little solar device. So selling those solar devices, the prices are coming down. But anyway, so yes, they can make money on it for sure. But they also want to promote nuclear power. Even even scientists that are against that don't believe there's evidence that humans are causing global warming, are pro-nuclear power generation. They think that's the solution to replace the pollution from the oil. Because even a lot of people agree that oil is toxic, and to breathe and to ingest and to have in our water and our food and wherever, and all the, so it's a multifaceted agenda to develop these energy sources, because relying on oil is really tricky business if the earth is shaking, or if the earth is covered with water where you are, or if your underground base is submerged in water, or maybe you've built an underground base that is sealed. And when it talks about how the people that are living in the sea, perhaps there's underground bases that were made in the past on this planet that were sealed so that the water couldn't get into them. They had a way to get into them, like an underground lake, for instance. In fact, there's supposedly an underground lake under Antarctica, or part of Antarctica. And that supposedly that's where Hitler was able to access with his U-boats, allegedly with space alien information about that. I don't know if that was, but there was some psychic involvement in that too. In the wing of the SS that was very psychic, very engaged in the magic and in psychic arts and in spiritualism and mysticism. They were very much into that. And so for them to, they could just have ideas. The Luciferian space aliens didn't have to actually appear to them physically or with their spacecrafts to give them ideas on how to build spacecrafts that look like flying saucers, and to give them ideas to search a certain area for a place to have a fortress to escape to if the war went bad, which is apparently what a general was, or an admiral in the equivalent of the Navy in Germany was assigned to do in his expedition to Antarctica. And he said, he came back, he gave a speech, said that he had secured a fortress for the Fuhrer, he said in a speech. He didn't say where it was, though, at the time. I don't know if that was a public speech or just a document that he wrote or whatever, a statement that he made to the press. Anyway, but in this video, which I'll also provide the link to, starting from about 3 minutes and 50 seconds, it shows a sun-grazing comet going into the sun and immediately causing a coronal mass ejection, a CME, which was on September 2nd, 2017, just happened a couple of days ago. Okay, then, shortly after that, I'm talking about, with the 6th, so it's already happened, so it was days or hours, I don't know what it was exactly. There were X-flares. Now, they weren't facing the Earth, so they weren't thought to have an effect on the Earth. But it shows you that the sun can actually be a huge biologically driven computer system. That the next level knows how to push buttons by sending a comet wherever that comet is. Who knows, with certain chemicals in it, or you know, that can, and sending it to maybe a precise location in the sun to stimulate ongoing activity. Because now we've got a situation to where the sun is generating these, what do you call them, solar storms that the CMEs come out of. And there's some that are turning to the Earth now, and they're facing the Earth, and they're huge holes in the sun. And but this guy, BP Earthwatch, his name is Jesse, I believe, what he documented during the Katrina storm, no, during the Fukushima event, was how the solar wind from a CME was facing directly that place on the Earth when it happened. Okay? Or when it was scheduled to hit the Earth, because sometimes it takes 20, depending on the speed of the solar wind, which has different speeds through those solar mass ejections. They're not always the same speed that they come out, and they're not always the same size. And so they don't have the same results. Like they had their result in the 1800s where it burned up a whole bunch of electronics. Wires were fried, and generators were fried, or not generators, but communication devices were fried. The Morse code things that were traveling over the wires. I forgot what the name of that was, but it's in these videos that I'm going to post all of them to look at on this video. But they recently discovered that they were able to measure a vast amount of heat that's coming from under the Earth, all over the Earth, all over the west part of the Earth, the west part of the United States. And they're saying that they're able to determine that with their using sound waves. They can determine what's producing that heat, and they're saying that it's not molten rock, which is what lava is thought to be, molten rock. They're saying it's molten carbon, CO2, but molten carbon. And that they're saying that it's as big as Mexico, the area that has this, and they're calling it the Cascadian subduction zone. And it says it has 100 trillion metric tons of CO2. And all the carbon that has been released by humans, I guess in oil, taking oil out of the earth, is taking carbon out of the earth. Has been a total of 10 billion metric tons. Okay? So they're saying this is, what, how many times is that? 10 billion compared to 100 trillion metric tons. So basically, if all that, and the fact is that they believe that they have all these charts and maps produced by the Navy and different people studying all this. For years they've been studying all this. And it shows how the solar wind goes to the core of the Earth and actually moves and heats up that molten carbon and causes it to move in a southwesterly direction. And who knows if that's going to end up coming out, all these hundreds and hundreds of volcanoes that are all over the West. You don't see them normally, but if you look at the satellite photographs, you can see them if you know what to look for. And there's people that are on the internet that are studying this and have been for years, and can show you where all the fracking sites are as well. So if that's carbon, molten carbon under there, then, and that goes into Texas and New Mexico, it's in Utah, it's in Colorado, it's in Nevada, it's in California, it's in parts of Oregon, in parts of Washington, I believe. And those are also the areas where the drought is the worst. And that's the other thing. The Earth was going to be destroyed by fire this time. And so that's an example of the solar wind, is that fire. And the solar wind, and also that's causing the drought by the heating up of the air and the water, which is the heating of the oceans, causing it to melt, which is also stimulating, enabling the next level to generate bigger storms, because the next level, I think, stimulates a lot of these storms to start them off, and I don't know. The next level might be able to just, determine where they're going to go exactly, and have them stay that spot exactly for as long as they want to, and then to go someplace else or regain strength and then come back again. Remember, Hurricane Sandy that hit New Jersey, actually, they didn't think was going to be a problem to the coast, much of a problem, but it did a hook. It actually did a hook turn and smashed right into the New Jersey coast. When people talk about global warming being the carbon produced by the fossil fuel burning of humans, that's all over the planet, right? With more being done in some countries than others. But China supposedly has more happening in it than the United States does. But yet, there were huge storms in other parts of the planet happening even before the combustion engine was developed, that had 175-mile-an-hour winds, just like I think Harvey was clocked at. Maybe not Harvey, but maybe Katrina was, or maybe Andrew. I'm not sure which one had those kind of winds associated with it. Camille, maybe. And some happened in the 1920s, just like 50, 60, 70 years from the start of the Industrial Revolution. So if all this came about because of the Industrial Revolution, then, okay, you could say that that's been escalating, of course, which I think we could say is truthful, factual, that there's been more and more industry from that period on, so there'll be more and more carbon production going into the atmosphere. Well, how does that get to be focused on just one area, to actually just heat up the water? No. That's not what I was trying to say. Well, if it's gradually increasing, then why would it not be gradually demonstrating the results of those increases, and kind of like in an even way on the planet. Why? I mean, what about that would cause a hurricane to shift directions and smash into the coast? Or to just decide to stop and just park itself on the Houston coast there and drop rain. And then a day later or 2 days later start to move up the coast. You know these things to an inquiring mind, to a scientist, if they don't look at these things as potentially intelligently directed, which some are looking at that, but they're thinking the humans are doing it or space aliens are doing it. See, that's where the facsimile comes in. To then say that the humans are creating the hurricanes, but then the problem with that is, what happened to the hurricanes that happened hundreds and thousands of years ago? Did the humans create those too? Even though we don't have any evidence that they had the technology to do it? With the chemtrails, or with generators that produce steam, or with the HAARP frequency generators? So this whole discussion is so convoluted to tackle in a logical way. Common sense doesn't exist anymore, really, among many. And no wonder why. We lose our common sense the more we give away, or the more we don't draw in the next level's mind. And the more we give away our force through sensuality. And sensuality can be through anger, or through passion to play music, or through overeating, or sexing, or all the different ways that sensuality is expressed, or through power, having power over others, feeling important, feeling like you're the general and you've got to be the one in charge because other people couldn't handle it, couldn't handle what you got to do, fighting evil with evil. Those things are all sensual experiences and all fornication, because it's like having sex with humans instead of giving our love to the next level only. And in particular to the next level older members that have most current incarnate older members, Tiendo. Well, I hope I've said some things that are useful. Or stimulated some ideas that are useful to others. And I'm going to close for tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Tiendo. But thank you for listening if this is an appeal to you, because then you can continue to spread Tiendo's information. And that's doing the work of Tiendo. However you do that, in whatever degree, in whatever ways, now or in the future.